Welcome. Welcome to Corporate and Strategic. It's been a busy morning on LTP and we've got more to come. So look, can I first invite Charles to lead us in the karakia?
Thank you. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai. E hina ki ana, te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hau,
Ti hei mauri ora.
tēnā koe Chair.
Thank you. So just on housekeeping, I think just about everybody in the room will have heard this a million times, but I do have a good run of causing evacuations of the building, so I know where to go, and it is onto the green patch out the front. If the siren goes, an earthquake, drop, cover and hold, long and strong, get gone up to Tiffin Park and just follow your neighbour if you're not sure where that is. And the emergency exits are clearly signposted and the wharepaku is behind us through a couple of doors. Thank you.
Did you say that already?
So we are being live streamed and recorded for viewing later date on YouTube. Do I have any apologies?
Yes, you do.
Yes, I know we have Hinawai, who can't be here today, and also Thompson, and commiseration to the family, to the bereaved family today. That's a great loss for Hinawai and Thompson personally, and for the Waimarama community, so kia kaha. Any other apologies? And Di Rodley, who's busy in Waira at the show.
And I've just been advised that Yurif has left as well, so he'll be an apology as well.
Thank you. Can I have a mover for the apologies, please? Thank you, Councillor Sears. A seconder. Thank you, Councillor Foley. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Speak. Right, so conflict of interest. Do we have any conflicts of interest to declare today? There are none. Thank you. Confirmation of minutes. So do we have any amendments to the minutes from the last meeting? Thank you, Dan.
I have one that Zan actually found yesterday, and that was item 12. Left out the reference to them being public excluded minutes. So I've just added public excluded into item 12 to make sure that that's noted.
No, kia ora. So if there are no other questions or comments, there are none, I'm happy to move that the minutes be accepted. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Will. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So, on to decision items. The response to the Ombudsman, open for business. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll just also invite Leanne and Desi to be at the table for this one to help with the detail. Members may remember that last year the Chief Ombudsman released a look at transparency across councils called Open for Business. I think a pleasing thing, a lot of the issues that the Ombudsman raised were already standard practice in the council, but there were a number of areas for us to consider further, in particular around workshops and workshops being open to the public. So this item really takes you through some of those key recommendations from the Ombudsman's report. It suggests some options on a way forward and some recommendations on how council might treat workshops in the future. And either Leanne or Desi will head through, I think Leanne, a little bit of the extra detail I could hand over to you, Leanne.
Really, the paper can be taken as read, and I'm thinking we're probably pretty much just wanting to take any questions, because that'll bring out any detail that we haven't included in the paper that you might need to know in order to make a decision. if that's all right.
Right, open the floor. Councillor Foley.
Oh, just perhaps quite topical with the revenue and financing policy that we've, as an example, I guess, that we've undertaken. It's well known now that that's been ongoing for 18 months to 2 years, and we've just had hearings, and I think some criticism, I guess, around the surprise it was to the public who weren't aware of it at all. So that would be an example where we start the process those 2 years ago now, right from the start. All of those workshops would be open to the public if we adopted this recommendation.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, that's right. I'd just clarify that we did, with the revenue and financing policy, we did do it in 2 steps. And so step 1, outcomes were resolved in a public meeting. So there was some visibility to the community on the process. And we did signal it at the start through our long-term plan. So, but you're right, that is a good example of where there is a awareness and education piece that actually is quite useful to bring the community along with us, and that an open meeting, an open workshop would deliver that.
Thank you.
Can I just add that, so if it was the case of when you were getting down to the detail of saying, well, what does that actually mean in practice? Those would likely be not in public, because the philosophical questions are all really very well done. But if you start telling people this is what your rates are going to be in a public forum, that could, cause problems for them. Either people will start depending on that information before it's actually in force, and it could affect property prices, all those sorts of things. So those detailed, hey, this property here, that's what it means for their rates, wouldn't be suitable for public discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Sears.
Or maybe just to clarify that, I have some comments, but just a clarification question for now. The reason for moving to public excluded in a workshop scenario, as suggested in the paper, would be under section 7 of the Act, and there's a number of reasons in there, including privacy of natural persons, etc., 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 which still gives the capacity for workshops to call upon this where they feel that privacy is needed for any of these reasons.
Yes,
now,
that's
all
correct.
of these relevant for workshops, or did I?
The only one,
Yeah, I think there
sorry,
was one.
through you, Chair, the only reason that is not able to be used for putting a meeting of any sort into public excluded is free and frank discussion or a free and frank exchange of ideas or whatever that it is. Yeah, so that's the only one you can't use.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the openness of workshops still has the capacity where there's private information or commercial sensitivity or any of these other reasons, the ability to create privacy. Because I think my question, Chair, is around also making the ratepayer confident that being open and transparent and letting people be more engaged also they would expect us to be able to conduct business in a way that has privacy in cases where that's needed. I do have other comments, but that was just clarifying that one.
So I think if we can just, I think in terms of process, if we can just work through sort of what I see as part A of this is the opening up of workshops, and so we'll just take any sort of more questions or comments. I quite like comments, so I will allow them today. And then we can move on to the question of the public forum. John.
Thanks, Chair. I just had a question on live streaming or not the workshops, and at the moment it's not doing it because of the additional costs associated with that. So actually that's making it inaccessible to a lot of people if it's not live streamed, and I'm just wondering the cost component of that, is that significant?
$700 per day, additional, that won't have been budgeted.
Okay.
So when you think of how many workshops we've been having through the LTP or the revenue and financing policy, that adds up quite quickly.
And we have, you'll see later in the paper, recommended that we, at the end of the calendar year, review how this has gone. So that could be a natural time to look at whether we want to move to live streaming or recording, and posting afterwards is another option.
Okay.
So essentially, the paper, as I take it, is saying we've got three options. We can just not change, and I don't think that option's on the table. We can change on the day, so we can just wake up in the morning and decide whether to tell the public whether or not a meeting's going to be open, or we can plan in advance. And it seems that logically the staff have settled on a recommendation says that we plan in advance for these things and we work on the presumption of openness. So on that basis, option 3 is the preferred recommendation. And the idea of reviewing from a cost and an openness, a further openness, to your point, is very well made. Yeah, Councillor Williams.
Yeah, look, thank you, and I think the paper is timely, if not overdue, as was the Ombudsman's report. It's been something that sort of troubled me as a councillor over the last 4 years, is this balance between ensuring councillors are sufficiently informed on issues and we get to explore our way through issues and build up a picture in our head, for example, around a long-term plan. But not really troubling the public with that until we've actually kind of decided, or at least got a sense of where we're going, and the need for greater public accountability. And the thing that really resonated with me is some of the media commentary around the Ombudsman's report and interview he did on Radio New Zealand the day it came out. And he talked about how there had been some embarrassment with councillors around the country and a feeling of greater refuge or safety in a workshop environment because you could ask dumb questions and reveal your lack of understanding or whatever it might be. And yet his response to that was, well, that's exactly what your public wants to see you doing. Dumb questions can be the very best, and they might also be the very question that your constituents wanted you to ask. Well, why didn't you ask that at the public meeting? And so I don't think we should be at all shy or ashamed of having workshops open to the public, frankly, whether videoed or not, but certainly so that people who are interested in the topic are aware of the topic can come along if they want to hear that topic discussed. And I think that that's would be actually healthy for the culture of the organisation. It would also enable people to better understand the purpose of workshops versus the purpose of decision making in a meeting. What's tended to happen, of course, is that we've had all of that discussion in a workshop that people haven't been coming to or even known about, and then we get to the meeting and someone puts a motion, pass, bang, do you want to speak? No. And people have got really no idea of the journey we've been on to that point and the degree of angst we might have applied to the issue and the way the conversations have evolved. It might have been over 3 or 4 workshops. But the other difficulty is, of course, like with the revenue and finance policy situation, we suddenly pop up like a mole out of the ground and say, here it is. And they say, well, you had 18 months, we've got 8 weeks. Where's the balance? So I do think having a situation where workshops are advertised, people can come if they want. If there's a reason in advance, it's a particularly sensitive matter of the likes that Ian's just discussed, that it's on the agenda, commercial negotiations, whatever it might be, privacy, those sorts of things, we can say why that particular one's going to be public excluded in advance. And I imagine there would also be an opportunity at a workshop if something comes up in the middle of it. Hey, look, that's just raised a personnel issue or something, or that's just raised a privacy issue. We could deal with it at that time. So I'm fully in support of this. I think it would be healthy for the organisation, and it's frankly well overdue. and I think would equally lend the public better ability to understand the work that we're doing on their behalf, somewhat more behind the scenes now than it should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Look, if no other speakers, I suggest we move on to the second part of this, which is about public fora, whether we adopt that. They're already in the standing orders, so they're already baked into the way that we do business in theory. We're just not using them. So does anyone want to lead off on that? Or just staff?
I think by way of introduction to public fora, there's already provision for deputations and the like to come to council meetings. So to some extent, the opportunity already exists, and really the question is one of having a more open or adding to the deputations opportunity with a public forum opportunity. I think the suggestion in the paper is that those are best when connected to items on the agenda rather than about any matter at all, which makes it more complex to work with. But yeah, really, and the suggestion in the paper is that should council want to I guess, promote public fora, then probably the first three committees are Regional Council, Corporate and Strategic, and Environment and Catchment Management. And then council may wish to add to that or not.
Thank you, Nick. Any questions on that? Okay, well,
I have a question.
sorry,
Go,
Jock.
Yes, it's a comment/question really. 25.9 says no debate or decisions will be made on issues raised during the forum unless related to the items already on the agenda. So on the face of it, that seems a reasonable thing to do. I'm just wondering in fact whether we need that or not. Someone might raise a genuine concern that wasn't anticipated as part of having this clause in here, and in those circumstances that's something that the chair might manage. And so if it was a left field thing that we couldn't really add any comment or value to, then that wouldn't be in. But if it was valid but not on the agenda, it would. So I didn't actually write a position on that, I confess, but it was just a note that I had.
Sorry, Leanne, you want to make a point?
Sorry, through you, Chair. Because of the decision-making requirements in the Local Government Act, you couldn't debate and make a decision on something that somebody just raised at a meeting, because you wouldn't have the staff advice, the options, the finance required, any of that information to hand to be able to make a decision. So in fact, no, you couldn't take the initiative of the chair and put it up for debate and a decision, no matter what it was. So the idea is that if there was a decision item already on the agenda that they were talking to, that then you would hear that and you would be able to take that into consideration when you were considering that decision. If there's no item on the agenda and they bring up something new, something you hadn't heard about, the decision-making provisions of the Local Government Act would preclude you making a decision and having a debate about that. Yeah.
Which in itself is not a problem. It just means we have to be clear about how you engage with a speaker from the public.
So the way around that would be that it could become the subject of a future agenda item that would come back to council. Yeah. Or the committee, whichever.
Thanks for that clarification, Leanne. Councillor Williams, you...
Yes, my
have a go.
question is a tricky one possibly, not for you, Leanne. If I were to add Regional Transport Committee there, because I know that a lot of people like talking to us about transport, about all sorts of dimensions to do with it. Can we decide that here, or do we need to recommend back to that committee? Because we set the terms of reference to that committee, don't we?
Yes, that's correct.
I could suggest an amendment that we include the Regional Land Transport Committee, or the Regional Transport Committee, I should say, and that would be what happens.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Can I just add, I think because it's already in our standing orders and we run joint committees under our standing orders, it's already an option available. So I don't know if we'd need to change the terms of reference.
Yeah, from the deputations part, anyway.
I think it'd just be a case of adding to recommendation 2.4.
Exactly.
And 2.44 is the opportunity to do that.
So, look, I would just like to raise a question in relation to the scope of public fora. So, having brushed up on our standing orders simply require that public fora, that an issue brought to a public fora is within the terms of reference of that committee, as opposed to the narrower question of whether that issue is on the agenda. And to me, narrowing that scope down to only being able to speak to items that are on an agenda in a particular day goes counter to my conception of why you have a public forum in the first place, because you're wanting to create opportunities for people to talk to you about stuff that you might not necessarily be talking about. So my preference would be that we respect what is in the standing orders already and work on the basis that the test is the scope of the committee terms of reference as opposed to the agenda on any particular day.
So, excuse me, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. It's not stated explicitly there, but the only reason that the subcommittee part is there is because the council has such a wide terms of reference, so people could come along and talk about absolutely anything. Whereas when you're coming to a committee meeting, you do only want that committee to be listening to things that are within its terms of reference. So it's not that if they came to council, it would only be accepted if there was a decision item on the agenda. It's just saying that,
Yes.
yeah.
So I don't think that's on, Chair, I don't think that that's on the table, that it has to be an agenda item. It would only be discussed later if it's on the agenda item. If it's in the terms of reference, there can be a deputation to that committee. I think that's what does.
That is not my reading of clause paragraph 25 of the paper that we've received, which says that will be open to any members of the public who wish to speak to council on matters on that day's agenda. I take the point that the ambit of the full regional council is much broader than the ambit of any of the individual constituent committees.
Yeah.
And I'm conscious that our chair of the regional council is not with us today. And so that makes me nervous about imposing a decision on her committee in her absence.
Well, can I say
Councillor Curtin, you want to pull me up on that comment?
yes, in terms of this is a recommendation to
Yeah, so
council.
it'd only be a recommendation.
And the chair will have an opportunity to consider that
Okay,
at that time.
well said. Thank you, Councillor Curtin. Anyway, so we've had a suggestion that possibly we can add a committee. We could also add joint committees. We could also subtract committees. And I just want to record that I'm, having been one of the people who brought this idea to the table, it would be remiss of me and, lots of words that are not good, if I was to then turn around and say I don't want them on my committee. So I would like... I would certainly be supporting public fora to test this for the balance of the year as is proposed, and then review as far as corporate and strategic is concerned. Councillor Sears.
Through you, Chair, I'm very supportive also of both of the options. I think from an Environment and Integrated Catchment Committee, we've been trying with and the Deputy Chair have been trying to bring a little bit of this about in our morning workshops by inviting in guests from groups or people working in work streams that are associated with that committee to try and bring a voice from the community into our work. It would be very difficult for anyone under this proposal coming to speak to our committee for it not to be relevant to our agenda, because we always have a bit of a state of the nation, so anything to do with the environment would always fit within it. So I don't see any conflict around being on that day's agenda or not, because our agenda covers all of our environmental work streams. I think it's a really a very casual way that community can step in for 5 minutes and bring something without needing to think it's a deputation or they need to be a petitioner or anything else, that we can hear voices that can be quite a small comment that can really make us aware of something that we're not aware of. So I'm very supportive of that. I don't have any particular issue in terms of the Environment Committee as to how it's structured, and I'm also open to all committees accepting or rejecting it as they think works best within their structure. Some of those I'm not on, so I'm not sure how it would fit within their work stream. So very supportive from my committee and supportive of others to make that decision.
Thank you, Councillor Sears. If there are no other questions, then do I have a mover for the recommendation or amendments to that?
Actually, I do have one question from the first part. Chair, if we approve this as opening our workshops, if we recommend this to council and that's approved at the end of this month, that's accepted, would we look to open workshops immediately, or is there a time frame in terms of staff requirements or any changes for your department?
There might be 2 or 3 weeks through you, Chair, just to get all the standing orders tidied up, but so late March, early April would be good to go.
I'm happy to move, Chair, that 2.1 to 2.6 with the addition of Regional Transport Committee of 2.4.4.
Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Second that.
Thank you, Councillor McIntosh. Would either of you like to speak to that motion?
Spoke long enough before.
Ditto.
No. Okay. So all those in favour of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Well done. Cool.
Mr Chair, just a question in arrears, a notice, giving notice of the intent to attend or have the forum, I couldn't see that in the
1 day.
1 day's notice.
1 day's notice, but is that after observing the agenda? Or
Yes.
so it's post the publication of the agenda? Okay.
So I'm presuming that 1 day is within 1 calendar day of the meeting itself. Is that?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, so
Yep, so the requirement is that the public has access to the agendas at least 2 full working days before the meeting.
then they need to give 1 full day's notice of the
To
intent
the
to.
committee secretary, yeah.
Okay.
Who seconded it?
John said he was. Right, thank you. So moving on, transit school bus services. Who's going to? Katrina, no doubt you'll lead us through that. Your normal thorough fashion. Thank you.
Team, good afternoon. I'm ably assisted by Mark here, the Transport Manager. Okay, so late last year, early this year, we're approached by Transit who operate and are contracted to the Ministry of Education to operate school services, school bus services. On top of the school bus services that they operate some services for school students that are not contracted by the Ministry of Education. So back when Nimmins was running the public transport service, Nimmins used to run extra services for students who were outside of their school zone. That's the likes of students from Flaxmere travelling to Hastings Boys, students living in Taradale travelling to Napier Girls or Napier Boys. Outside of their zone are not funded by the Ministry of Education to operate those services, and so they operate them on a commercial basis, accepting that they generally don't make money from them, and as of late that has been getting worse. We have seen that in our own public transport contract where indexation has hit levels of 27 and 30% annually. The same applies to Transit operating their services. They approached HBRC asking if there was any funding available through our subsidised passenger transport through Waka Kotahi, whether we could support them. you'll remember that Waka Kotahi provide Hawke's Bay region with a 51% subsidy for public transport. We approached Waka Kotahi and asked them if there was funding available. And in our what's called low cost, low risk funding bucket that we get from Waka Kotahi, there is some funding available to us, but we have no projects in there that we can utilise that funding for. So it sits there unspent. We asked Waka Kotahi, would they entertain us adding these services to our offering for public transport, and could we use that funding? In fact, they were the ones that suggested it. So Waka Kotahi are supportive. There is a question here for council, and that is of, actually it's not, we are as officers recommending and suggesting that this is not a significant investment item. For the rest of the financial year, it would cost, subsidised by Waka Kotahi, it would cost Hawke's Bay Regional Council $24,500. Unsubsidised, there's about a $50,000 cost, is that right?
The rest of this financial year.
As part of the conversations that we've had with with Transit, they have suggested that if there is no funding available for them, they will end these services at the end of the term. They extended it for a term longer than they were going to. They were going to end them at the end of last year to give Hawke's Bay Regional Council time to have these conversations and bring this matter to the table. We have built it into the LTP budgets that you will be receiving and adopting. And the total cost of that, as you'll see in the report, is $300,000 per annum. In terms of the cost to ratepayers, ongoing from 2025, again, it would be subject to the 51% subsidy. So actually the cost to ratepayers would be $147,000. On average, if we spread that across all our ratepayers at a fixed rate, and I know that's not how our rates work, but if we were going to do that, just as what would that cost? Over the total number of our ratepayers, the onward cost would be about $2.89 per household that's paying rates. Some will pay more because of the capital and land value. To take it to the end of the year, it's 52 cents per ratepayer. What else can I add?
Is that in Napier Hastings or across the whole region?
That is Napier Hastings, which are our targeted ratepayer base. In Napier and Hastings, we only have targeted rates for passenger transport in Napier and Hastings.
You were saying all ratepayers, so.
Sorry, I'm talking about targeted ratepayers for public transport. So, okay, and the other thing about that is we currently, through our public transport contract of GoBus, operate what we call overflow services now for and Mark can talk to those a bit more if you want, but we do operate what we call overflow services for schools now, for students. Taradale through into Napier City, Flaxmere or Hastings into Havelock, and Flaxmere.
Yeah, there's a couple of services a day from Flaxmere into Hastings Boys and the likes.
The reason we run these is because if we didn't, the school students would overwhelm the public transport, the ordinary fixed line that we run. And that was happening particularly in these routes that we offer. And so what we did is added in some extra runs so that we could accommodate the numbers of students. And we run them at a slightly earlier or a slightly later time than the fixed service that we run for the public, so that there is a slight difference there. So this is not out of the box, completely different than what we're already operating. It's just that we don't have a public transport contract with Transit, who currently operate the services. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Katrina. Questions for Katrina or Mark? Councillor Sears.
I'm still a wee bit confused. Would Transit continue to offer the service, continue to charge the tool $3, and we would be subsidising the service? Is that how it would work practically?
Correct. We and Waka Kotahi.
Yeah.
I have comment, but I'll wait for questions.
Further questions? Councillor Curtin.
Oh, it's got a quick one.
Oh,
Just a bit more confusion
Councillor Foley.
around this targeted ratepayer, but in the recommendations, it's general rates. Is that just for that top up for this year and then you go to, in the recommendations, it's pull it from the general rates?
Sorry, that's
Targeted rate.
That's incorrect. It's because, that's incorrect. It's, we don't general rate public transport, so I'm sorry, that should say from targeted rates. And where that is overspent in any year, it goes through to a reserve and is paid back from the next financial year's targeted rates.
Okay, great. Thank you.
My apologies.
Councillor Curtin.
Thanks, Chair. Just a few quick fire questions, if you don't mind. Trina, so currently on our public transport system, we are transporting students out of zone to the respective single-sex schools or other schools.
Yep.
And so they're availing themselves of public transport. And the concern is that if we remove this service, it would have to increase our capacity on the public transport.
Well, yeah, there's two factors in there. If this service wasn't to operate, we don't have capacity on the corridors where they align, but there is a few other corridors where they don't align as well. And the overall impact of that is to sort of 390 students per day.
Sure.
About 75,000 a year.
So can you tell me, for students travelling to, for example, a denominational schools like Sacred Heart or St John's, are they paid for from the Ministry of Education budgets, do you know?
If a student is in zone, that cost is funded by the Education Service, because if one of these examples, if you like, from Taradale to Napier Boys or to Napier Girls, because there's a Taradale High School, they're deemed to be out of zone to travel to those other two
Through
schools.
you, Chair, I'm not sure about the denominational schools.
Sure.
I'm not sure if they're funded by Ministry of Ed or not.
Okay, I'm just trying to land at the, if you like, an in-principle decision as opposed to the practicality.
We operate, for example, a service from Napier out to Rudolph Steiner. So that's a public transport service that's not funded by Ministry of Education.
So there's
I don't know.
already precedent, if you like,
Correct.
for the work. Yeah. Okay. So these you've identified there's 340, I think, students, predominantly in
390 at this.
in total, but for 83% of them arise in Taradale, Green Meadows, Tamatea, I guess. And so these are students out of zone for the schools they're travelling to. They are bypassing Taradale High School, Colenso and Tamatea High to get to their school of choice. So the consequences of making this decision would be to, if you like, subsidise that choice making to the tune of, in a full year, $700 odd. Is that a reality of this?
Essentially, yes, councillor. If the students were to have to pay the cost themselves, it would be about $700 a year that they would need to pay for a bus service to get to Napier Girls, Napier Boys, and Hastings Boys.
Sure. And finally, my question, in paragraph 31 of the paper, it's described as a significant impact on Taradale High School. What is implied by that? And would there be impacts for Tamatea and Colenso?
Look, what is implied by that is if the service wasn't there and those students changed and went to Taradale High School, you would have an impact of a significant amount of students in one hit going to those schools, which from the research that we've done will have a significant impact on being able to actually house and accommodate such a mass change.
They could go to Tamatea or Colenso equally, could they?
Yeah, look, I don't think we can, I guess, from our perspective, we can't comment on why the students choose to not go to those high schools.
I'm not asking that, I'm just reading from your paper.
Yeah, they could. They could absolutely change schools rather than take private transport or other means of getting to school.
Councillor Curtin, Councillor Sears.
So just to clarify on other schools, would this proposal mean all students living out of zone of a school that wish to get to any school in the Hawke's Bay will be provided service? Or is it only these particular groups? For example, I know there are people in Havelock North who wish to come to Napier Boys, for example. Are we making sure that every student who's living out of zone can now get to school?
And that's one of the overrun services, or one of the reasons that we do run an overrun service from Havelock North into Hastings.
Yeah. But again, it is targeted to those current 8 routes because we know that there is demand for those services. We're not proposing to have an overarching school network to get anybody to anywhere. It is just where we know there is currently demand.
Well, I have a question, Katrina or Mark. So the proposal is not just to fund the balance of this financial year, but to fund ongoing. Is the NZTA money ongoing, that subsidy, assured? What's the process for negotiating, navigating that, getting commitments? How far out does that go?
So we're currently building our regional land transport plan, which includes all our investment required for the next 10 years. That's about to go out for consultation, and that budget is included in there, where we then seek that funding from Waka Kotahi. So we're in the process now of setting our next 10-year plan.
Thank you. Further questions?
Actually, I've just got one further point of clarification. So did I hear you correctly, Mark, say we do overrun services at the moment in some cases where there are lots of kids need to go from A to B?
Yes, like as an example, we run 2 a day out of Hastings to Hastings Boys, yet there is a high school that they could go to that is closer.
Right. So is another way to look at this to say that actually this is just an extension of that service?
Yes.
Kind of,
Yep.
and is that for the students the 390 students that we're talking about? Does that work for all of those students to have an overrun service? Is that?
Sorry, I'm a little bit lost.
Does it mean? I think you mentioned before there were some areas where getting from A to B wasn't something that was part of a normal bus route, and therefore wouldn't fit into an overrun service.
I think so where we'd like to get to in terms of putting out our contract for 2025 and onwards, our next public transport contract, what we need to be able to do is incorporate these extra 8 services into the public transport network. We can't do that until we go out for contract in 2025 and until the contract that Transit have with Ministry of Education changes as well. So what we're hoping to be able to do, Mike did allude and I cut him off, my apologies, is that in the short term, this is the proposal. In the long term, it's to build it into the public transport network.
Yeah, just one question on the timing point. So the certainty that presumably transit needs now is the 24,000, which is the decision item.
Correct.
And the other 150 that's within some long-term planning assumptions, that can wait until we've been through a consultation process on that. So they don't need that decision today. That can wait until June or something like that.
Correct. It could be part of the consultation that we do on the long-term.
But really, the immediate decision is just the 25,000, and you're telling us that there is an extra year from June this year to June next year in the mix for our long-term plan conversation, right?
Correct.
Perhaps if I can express that another way, as I said, yes, the recommendation is only in relation to that funding for the rest of the financial year. But if we think about the operation of a school year, then we are charting a course that would be creating expectations for the rest of the school year at least. And so we would sensibly contemplate that at least this infers commitment for the rest of the school year, which is another half a financial year. I think that would be prudent. Doesn't have to be reflected in the resolutions, but it's a realistic assessment, I think, of where we find ourselves.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry, I'll just finish and then you can have a crack, Neil. I would just observe that this paper could be interpreted as a support for Taradale High School and not much else. One of the things that to me is missing is some input from the school community, and so I think we as councillors would benefit from having representation from the wider school community around the needs. So if that was possible, I think our understanding would be elevated. Councillor Curtin.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm comfortable to actually move the recommendations, but with clarity around the general rate, targeted rate thing, because I don't think we can reset the targeted rate current year. So we're going to have to draw down on general rate and take a hit on a big increased deficit or an increased deficit of that balance in the meantime. Is that right?
Through you, Chair, it would come out of the general rate fund. If that is overspent, it would then go to the reserve for transport and be funded from any surpluses out of that general rate pool, is my understanding, or it gets transferred into a reserve and comes out of next year's general rate fund. Targeted rate. Oh my God.
You said general 3 times.
Sorry,
I
mean targeted. Targeted rate. Oh, no chocolate fish for me
So we need to change
today.
the wording to targeted rate here, or do we
Correct.
leave it?
Yes, correct.
But
Yes.
technically, is it actually the general rate?
So let me say that
it's not.
again.
No, it's
Let
not.
me say this again for the public record. It is funded from targeted the public transport is funded from targeted rate.
Yes.
Where that targeted rate is overspent, it goes into a reserve, and then the targeted rates from the following year are used to pay that.
Oh, gotcha.
Thank
So-
you,
So we
Katrina.
need to change the wording.
No, point taken. I have councillor Sears, but first Leanne.
I was just going to say, yes, I've made that change to the recommendation.
I apologise.
Councillor Sears.
Thank you. It doesn't matter whether we call it targeted or general rate, it still comes from our ratepayers. And I want to thank the team, Katrina, under the enormous financial burden of public transport, which we know is incredibly difficult across all regional councils in New Zealand, the amount it costs and her determination to continue to provide the service that we know matters. And to Mark, who I know I've had offline discussions with this year around trying to help around students and schools and all the problems. So I wanted to preface it with that because you won't like what's coming next. I don't think transport is our core business. Our long-term plan, coming to it this afternoon, is looking incredibly pressured for our whole community. You will see in our paper this afternoon that even our contribution to Te Mata Park Trust, which is chair of the Environment Committee, is one of our absolute core functions and core partners, is looking to be cut. So for me to look at subsidising students who are living out of zone and putting effectively the money that we'll be taking out of projects that are building biodiversity, that just doesn't make any sense to me. To be so mean as to not put in 25,000 to at least let the students and their families work out how they're going to go forward. I suppose I could probably be convinced to support that, but I have to say here that the idea that I would be looking longer term to support investing more ratepayer money into that rather than what I see as our core function would be very unlikely.
Thank you, councillor Sears. So, councillor Curtin, I think you were moving
Well,
amended.
I've only moved and there's no seconder yet, but I'm very much in sympathy with councillor Sears on this and wondered whether we do add that this is essentially an interim arrangement while we sort through the situation, because it doesn't say anything out for the out years or next year. It's simply getting us from A to B, isn't it, to 30th of June. Is that sufficient to work through with the issues that I share with councillor Sears on the equity of the whole thing?
Dan, can you give us your advice as to whether that's necessary or not?
So my advice would be that's a decision to come through the long-term plan, not to be made today.
Exactly. So not required. Could I suggest, Mr. Chair, that we might add a third recommendation in there, that council notes that it's making no commitment beyond the scope of this paper and will consider its options through the long-term plan process. Beautiful. And that just makes it really publicly clear.
Yes, that's really good.
I'd like to second the motion on that basis.
Oh, hang on, before we get to that, councillor Lambert would like to say something. Question? Yep.
Yeah, just so I'm clear, so these students are out of zone, so their parents have opted for them to go to another school, but by the same token, that school has accepted it. So that's, I mean, the last point of entry into a school is that the school accepts it, and they don't have to. Yeah, I'm a bit worried about supporting something that ultimately that an education has a process, and the school that's actually providing that education is against it as well. So I don't quite understand it, why it's a zone thing and it's not being accepted as a zone thing. Why are we not supporting the zoning of the government?
I suspect there's a disconnect between the school decisions to accept their students and the practicalities of how they get to their position in the school.
But schools still have a choice whether to accept them or not.
So through
Absolutely.
you, Chair, I don't think this is about Hawke's Bay Regional Council supporting in-zone, out-of-zone or an education system. I think this is about Hawke's Bay Regional Council identifying that we have a public transport need. And we offer public transport services because we're required to by legislation. And if we don't support this, which you're more than, you can say no, the concern of officers is that we will have students overwhelming our public transport service where they are available and where they can use them to get to school. I might add that, and while it's none of our business, that if you do want to attend Napier Girls or Napier Boys, unless you live, or if you live in Taradale, then you're immediately out of zone and you have to go to one of those schools there. You can't choose to go to the girls or the boys' school. So I think that's part and parcel of the issue that Napier largely faces, is that it offers a public school, girls and boys, but then they've zoned them. And therein lies the issue, because Ministry of Education refused to fund that access. But that is not for ours to argue. Ours is simply about a public transport issue and whether or not we want to support what we know is a need, a public transport need.
Thank you, Katrina. Look, I think we've probably done enough on this one. Councillor Curtin, so we have an amended, Leanne, are you able to
Isn't it
capture that?
repeat that? Trying to.
So we have points 1, we're receiving the staff report. We're recommending 2.1, it's not a significant decision. We're agreeing that funding shortfall of 24,500 for 2023-24 it will come from targeted rates, we say.
Yes.
Although I think the truth is slightly more complicated, but we'll get there. And
And that
point 3,
options for funding beyond 23.
My suggestion to you, Chair, and up to councillors if they want to use it, would be that the committee notes that is not making a commitment beyond the end of this financial year, and that any future consideration will come through its long-term plan process.
That's the motion that I happily seconded, Chair.
and just for the sake of clarity, Neil, you're happy with that one? Wonderful. So all those in favour?
Hang on, Chair.
Sorry, would you like to speak to that?
Yes,
would you?
well, I haven't, because I didn't ask, yes, I was waiting for comments, and I think it is important to try and tease out questions from comments, otherwise we end up in debates with the staff. We're all conscious of that. And so the comment I wanted to make, and perhaps the mover of the motion would like to speak first.
I would like to.
Yes. So I'll
Interrupt your flow.
No, I'm happy to wait. You go first.
I mean, I thought about this paper overnight, but I think I've overthought it, and I'll come back to the staff's position that essentially, if we view it as a public transport matter in isolation, then we arrive at a relatively happy place. I was conscious of the equity that may apply, as Councillor Sears has alluded to, for across the region. Are we going to introduce a generic policy that says anyone from anywhere can get to their school because we'll provide a bus service? I don't think we're saying that. We are saying there is a public transport need arising, and we can address that. I've sort of rationalised in my mind to say if there was a group of senior citizens in Taradale who wanted to get to Napier on a regular basis, and we're a responsive public transport system, we probably provide that service. So I've sort of landed at that point, putting aside the matters of, if you like, the travails of the education system in Napier, where students, parents and students are choosing to bypass their local school, in this case 3 schools, to attend a school of their choice, then we are enabling that sort of decision making. We're then subsidising that decision to the tune of $700 odd a year, so that you can go down those rabbit holes. I've extracted myself from there and said, here is a practical solution to providing a public transport system subsidised to the tune of 51%. Why wouldn't we?
Thank you, Councillor Curtin. Very well put. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Councillor Zan. Chair. So, yes, I guess I'm equally conscious that we've got some very tough choices as the next paper signals, one of which is the decision yet to be made around Te Mata Park, and that it being $2 is actually $2 in someone else's pocket, and there's a virtual octopus of hands reaching into our ratepayers' pockets at the moment from everywhere trying to pull those $2 out. So I'm starting from that understanding, don't get me wrong. But I do wonder if we're looking at this through the wrong end of the glass, wrong end of the lens, or however the metaphor works, in that people go and will go where they wish in our region for all sorts of reasons. They might choose not to shop at the Tamatea, Pack and Save, and instead go to the Napier. They might choose not to swim at Onikawa Pools and instead go to the sports park. And we need to think about servicing the transport that people want to embark on. And in effect, what we're being offered here is a partnership from a private operator to help us with that. And we're going to be looking at community models and what you might even call public-private partnerships around getting people moving in this region in a variety of ways. And so, in fact, what we've got here is a savings in the sense that the maths I've read is that for every $1 someone spends getting onto a bus, you save 13 in social and environmental costs. So yes, we do capture the transport agency, Waka Kotahi 51%. We do save that demand on our public transport system that would otherwise follow from this. And for those reasons, I'm inclined certainly to adopt the 25,000 and to track the rest of this through our long-term plan conversation where we can weigh up those competing demands for our ratepayer funds. So support the motion on that basis.
Kia ora, Councillor Williams. So we'll move on. The motion's been put. All those in favour? Say aye. Against? No. One. So we can just call Councillor Lambert as against. Motion is carried. Thank you. It's a lot of discussion for $24,000, but worthwhile and has a larger context to individuals. Right, so that is us for decision items. Moving on to information items now. The first one is the long-term plan project update. Fresh from, 3 hours on that this morning, we will launch into the first truly public detailed discussion about our next long-term plan.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I will hand over shortly to Susie and team. But just by way of introduction to this item, with your decision this morning around how council holds workshops, we're likely to see a slightly different process for the next long-term plan, which will be more public in the workshops that council considers. From my perspective as the CE, this paper really helps to put on the public record the process that council has been through up to now with your LTP discussions, noting that you're still in that process and that none of the information in here is a decision until council makes a decision to adopt its draft long-term plan for consultation, which will occur in March this year, with consultation with the community then planned through April and into early May. So any commentary in here is provisional in that way. What the long-term plan process has revealed, along with many councils across the country, is that the pressure on local government resourcing and the ability of local government to fund the services expected of it has become increasingly difficult under the existing rating models. And that was a live conversation with the government. It will be a live conversation with the current government, but for now we are in the system that we're in. For this region in particular, there's a number of things that are going to play at hand for this long-term plan. Quite clearly and uppermost in everybody's mind will be a focus on the continued recovery from the impacts of Cyclone Gabrielle, and we're likely to see that occur for many years to come. The cyclone recovery affects the way that this long-term plan is built. So generally, long-term plans are a 10-year projection of what council intends to deliver and how it intends to fund them. The cyclone has created a lot of uncertainties for the 5 councils in Hawke's Bay, and as a result, government has put special legislation into place, which means that our long-term plan this year is very much a 3-year long-term plan and looks at what is ahead of us in terms of recovery and resilience. So up till now, and I'm sure the community will see, subject to your final decisions, a strong focus in the long-term plan on enacting our agreements with the Crown around flood defences and flood mitigation work as a real priority for this region over the next 3 years. Just also note that there are a number of other significant issues that impact on council's financial situation, and those include the performance of investments over a long period of time. I think in concert with seeing global markets being a tougher place, so the returns that the council receives from its investments are smaller than predicted. And council has taken a number of steps through public papers to look to improve and generate more consistent returns. And I know Susie and Jess can speak to that in some more detail. So those have been significant drivers of where we are. And added to that has been, I think, a desire, particularly during the years of COVID, to keep rate rises to a minimum, but still to continue to deliver services. The result of that is that council now has some of that borrowing to repay. And borrowing is repaid across a number of years, so it doesn't hit ratepayers all at once. But financially, this long-term plan will look to begin that process of dealing with rate smoothing that occurred post-COVID. As part of the long-term plan process, council has considered provisionally, again up till now, the opportunity to divest some of its assets, and a number of the paragraphs in this paper talk about the debate about divestment versus investment. And with your leave, Chair, I might ask Susie to talk to those in a bit more detail, and then open for questions.
Thank you, Nick. Look, it's an excellent suggestion. Can I just, before Susie takes us through that, I just sort of make the comment that I don't believe that today is the day for councillors to debate the choices that we are having to make through the LTP. We would be here for hours. That time will come. Today, I think the primary order of business is to surface the work that's gone on so far in the interest of transparency. And I just say, and to paint the clearest picture we can of where the council finds itself, but at this stage in the process, which is not the stage of making decisions and not the stage of having a complete story to tell the public. So it would be great for Susie to lead us through the investment side of things, but I'd just say that in terms of completing that story at the moment, what this paper doesn't really bring out is the rest of the process from here until we actually go to consultation. So it would be helpful if staff would just outline that very, very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, the remaining process will be 2 to 3 remaining workshops, and then in a formal public item, council will debate and then look to adopt its draft long-term plan for formal public consultation. And at that point, council will put its proposals for the next 3 years to the community. I think that's provisionally planned to be from the 15th of April through to the 15th of May. As part of that community engagement process, councillors will have the opportunity to look at how they wish to engage their communities, both in traditional written forms and submissions, and potentially by way of meetings. Once that process of public consultation has been concluded, council will hold hearings, and people can submit and come to those hearings to give their perspectives and points of view. And then council, again, in full public meeting, will deliberate on the draft long-term plan and make your final decision with an aim that you're ready to strike your rates by the end of June this year.
Thank you, Nick. Susan.
Thank you, and Nick has done a great job at probably introducing a lot of my points, but I do want to reiterate this is information only today and a summary for the benefit of this council where we've got to, but also the public, just to reiterate some of that process and the key points. A couple of things, and I'll point you at the paragraphs. I do want to reiterate a number of significant headwinds that the council is facing, and we're making no secret about that, but primarily the public will be aware that in August, September last year, we committed to the Crown we committed $44 million as our part of the Crown negotiations on the Category 2 flood mitigation program. That 44 must be delivered. That is part of the broader $250 million that the Crown gave us. So that cost is a fixed cost to us. It's a mandatory one that is going to be built into our long-term plan as an increase. And it's no secret, obviously, that cost pressures such as inflation, insurance are providing a significant challenge for us. The one thing I do want to reiterate to you and also the public, that a decision was made in 2021 not to give a rate increase to the public at that time. That was budgeted through that LTP. That decision to help the community at that stage by not putting on that rate increase, the council at that time borrowed to cover the costs instead. So that decision, to help that community has had some long tail headwinds for us as we look to pay off that debt as a result of that decision. I do want to focus though on paragraph 15 onwards around the investment strategy. So we have been working on the investment strategy refresh now for 14 months, as you'll all be aware, primarily because there is a need for those investments to work harder for us. It's recognised over the last 14 months that some of those assets in our investments, the Napier Port, cash flow received from prior sales of the Ruataniwha water consents, that those investments need a better return, albeit the markets have been down. We recognise that we needed to get better returns. We've been working with Scott Hamilton, who is the ex-CEO of Quayside, and we've really invested in driving a program of work to make that happen. This council has hired 2 independent board members with the right experience to really elevate the returns of that. Now, what that does for us, our investment portfolio through returns and dividends from the port, supplement our income to the tune of $12 million a year. That is circa 25% of this council's annual income comes from our investments. What we are trying to do through the investment strategy is to make that return bigger. We are using Scott Hamilton to replicate the model of Quayside. Quayside was exactly the same entity as we have in HBRIC. In fact, they started smaller. They took their entity from 50 million to 3 billion. And actually what that company now does for the Bay of Plenty Regional Council is to give them $42 million of income a year. That is our aim for this council, is to use our investment portfolio to really ramp up and generate further income for our ratepayers in the future. I guess that is primarily the purpose of the investment strategy, and some of those discussions and papers that we've put through this committee have really highlighted that that's the intent. The paper in itself that I've put into you today, paragraph 23 onwards, articulates back to you some of the things we've discussed as to why or what the impact is of selling an investment asset now at this point. It's common knowledge that the markets at the moment are probably at their peak low. Investments, equities should be on the way up. The property market isn't necessarily at a high where we hold them. So we're at a time where our investments could be valued at a lower amount, and intergenerational look to hold those to increase the value and the return on those in due course. I'm going to leave that there, which provides a summary of where we've got to on the investment strategy to date, and open to questions.
Thank you, Susie. Any focused questions from councillors, please? Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Susie, for that summary. You spoke about a significant factor with a bit of a hangover, if you like, is the 0% increase in 2021 that the council at the time decided as a relief valve, if you like, for a community they perceived that would be hurting as a result of lockdown. Since that time, has the organisation grown in terms of over and above inflation, in terms of size, costs, structure, number of staff?
Yeah, so the long-term plan in year one, the last long-term plan, that predicted an increase of, a rates increase year on year, at that time about 15%, 20%. And it did demonstrate that this organisation was going to grow and predicted through that long-term plan. As a result of acceptance of that long-term plan and the increase in activities that were in that, this organisation did grow. So it grew to enable to deliver those, certainly within those first 3 years, yes. So it was predicted a growth at that stage, yes.
Yeah, so I guess my point is it's not, that 0% increase is one factor as to why, we're still seeing significant rate rises. I guess my only other question is thinking about, as we still continue this journey and get along this process towards consultation, is my perception out there is kind of across the board, everyone's doing it pretty tough. It doesn't really matter whether you're a sheep farmer, dairy farmer, an orchardist, commercial business, urban resident. Everyone's seen increased costs, reduced income in a lot of the businesses. What option, so we're looking at, okay, what's our option to get further income? What options do they have, any of those examples of getting extra income at the moment? So say if you're an apple orchard, a lamb farmer, there's not, is there? No.
Through you, Chair, I'm not sure that's a question staff can answer.
No. The point's well made, Councillor Foley, but I don't think we should expect staff to answer that one.
Yeah.
Councillor McIntosh.
It's probably more a commentary than anything else. The subject of asset sales comes up quite a lot, basically saying, for the reasons that Councillor Foley just mentioned, you've got to keep a lid on things, and I don't care if we sell $5 million worth of assets, that'll take 12.5% off the rates this year. The other side of that is it's going to increase rates by 0.75% per annum thereafter because of the less amounts you've got invested. But nevertheless, some people might just think, we'll go for it. I really need 12% this year. And so it's just a comment, really. It's going to be interesting to see what people come back with when we consult on this. But I think it's something we should note. We're saying, from a long-term financial perspective, it's not a wise thing to do. The people who pay us might just say, don't care, I just need that reduction.
Thank you, Councillor McIntosh. Councillor Curtin.
Just to follow on from Councillor McIntosh, can we just clarify that we're not actually, or are we consulting on divesting assets? Are we asking that question in the LTP process, whether we're going to divest assets or not? Can we clarify that point?
Ultimately, through you, Chair, that's a question for councillors. Your guidance so far has been that you're not looking to divest assets, but clearly you don't make any final decisions now until you formally go out for consultation.
Sure. This paper's indicating some areas where provisionally identified changes in service. So at this point in time, it's not identified in the paper that there is planned to be or proposed an asset divestment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Can I just go to your paragraph 34 in the paper? Obviously, the staff have gone to considerable length to clarify a topic of conversation around divestment of assets, and good on you, because the public is interested in that and the circumstances. But I just wonder whether you can clarify the interconnectedness of the council reserves with their investment funds, so that public their understanding of what these funds represent, the consequences for it, some more. Can you help me there, please?
Gosh, that's a big question, and a very simple answer. I'll give my best. So this council holds a significant amount of reserves. So when the community pay their targeted rates, they must be used specifically for that targeted purpose. If not, they're held in a reserve. We also rate for various depreciation reserves, asset replacement reserves. We have long-term investment fund reserves. So any reserve that we have needs to have a liquid asset sitting behind that, albeit some of them have got cash in them, great. Some of those funds can be repurposed and are used in terms of the underlying cash, but as long as there's a liquid asset sitting under there that can be liquidated at the time, then you would expect all reserves have some form of liquid asset sitting behind them. So if you choose to sell some of those assets that are providing backing to some of those reserves, you leave yourself in an open position such that should a disaster reserve, depreciation reserve be needed to be used, you will then have to borrow that money as opposed to liquidate some assets. Does that help? It's a complicated topic, but one that is hard to simplify, but hopefully that helps.
Susie, I think that was adequate for today's purposes. Councillor Sears, I think this will be the last question.
Thank you, it's a comment. Would you like me to wait?
Yes, I'd like you to wait, thanks. Okay, so we're asked to receive and note
Happy to move.
the report. So we're going to move Councillor Williams, seconder. Yeah, Councillor Sears, would you like to speak to that?
Well, taking your lead, Chair, I don't think now's the time. I just really wanted to thank Nick and Susie for the very thorough overview you both gave of the situation we face, some of the reasoning behind where we're at the moment and our journey towards notifying a long-term plan for a public conversation, some of the challenges we face. Yeah, and I think I'll probably leave it there equally to thank all the staff that have helped inform that position from your own point of view and giving that advice. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Sears.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I really just wanted to highlight, firstly, how good I thought the paper was in terms of trying to bring some transparency to all the work we've done. We know that's going to be different the way we're working moving forward, so really supportive of that. But I did want to note item point number 11, the provisional identified changes in these particular schemes and partnerships, Hawke's Bay Tourism, Sustainable Homes, Regional Parks, Tamata Park, My Way. These are not decided. These are things that will go through to our final workshops and will be put together as a proposal for the community to speak on. So I just wanted to make that really clear to anyone watching, that once this is only a proposal that goes out, that's the opportunity for the community to come back and tell us where we've got things right or wrong, or things they may value more than we have anticipated.
Thank you, Councillor Sears. Councillor Curtin has
Sorry, I was just still going. And I also wanted to note item 13, the cost cutting that council's taken. I'm glad you've been explicit in showing those figures, and just to make the public aware of how tightly all the departments have been through to trim costs, and I think it's good to see that represented in the, also clearly stated in the paper for ratepayers to see that departments are working hard on that. Thank you, Chair. I finished.
Councillor Curtin wishes to speak.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and just conscious of your advice to us at the commencement of this paper around not considering, this is not about considering the long-term plan issues, which will be subject to further council meetings and deliberations, but the paper does spend a considerable amount of energy in terms of addressing this notion of selling up the family silver to fund some of those events. It's unlikely to be part of the long-term plan process, but I'd just like to emphasise that that in my view a short-term decision was made in 2020 when we chose, in the face of a disaster, to forego a rate rise. Has landed us in a terrible position, really, and I'd hate to see a view around asset sales similarly placing placing future councils in a difficult spot as well. I think what this paper does, and I'm very grateful for it, is to have highlighted the consequences of such a move, and any reader of this in the public, particularly those advocating for, if you like, the rainy day is here and therefore we should sell. In my view, the rainy day is not here, and the consequences of selling are dire and would end up costing future generations far more than it's worth to cash the silver up today. So thank you for the paper, and we ought to make sure that's well, if you like, socialised so people understand what those consequences are.
Thank you. Right, the motion's been put. All of those in favour, say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And thank you, Susie and team. But you don't get to go away yet. But Chris is going to join us. Financial reporting.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll hand over to Susie, Chris, and to take you through this item. In 2 minutes, my computer's about to die, so I'm going to find the lead. Thank you.
Through you, Chair.
Floor is yours, Chris.
Thank you. I'll take the paper as read, but what I wanted to highlight out here is following previous council conversations or corporate and strategic conversations, we are in the process of trying to change the way we present the financial report. So it is more focused on what the council is as a whole and more aligned to annual plans and annual reports rather than focusing on some of the groups of activities. We have tried to work in line with the organisational performance report, which will come up next, which will talk about each of the groups of activities on their non-financial indicators as well as their financial performance in there. And so what we have concentrated in the financial report is our overall council position. What we have included this time is a table that reconciles the Statement of Comprehensive Revenue and Expenditure, the income and expenditure statement, from the total that we've presented as a council to the figures that have been included in the operational performance report for each of the groups of activities. In the revenue and expenditure, you will see in there that they are significantly impacted by sediments and debris activity, which was an unbudgeted activity as part of the annual plan, but we've received significant funding for that and obviously spent quite a considerable amount during the year. Outside of the sediment and debris income, we are slightly better than our annual plan forecast at this point in time. A lot of that is also relating to where we had in the annual plan a fairly evenly phased spread of the other recovery expenditure from the cyclone, whereas we're seeing that that is going to be a lot more lumpy, and there hasn't been as much of the new stuff, especially around the 44 million and that in the early part of the year as we would have expected in there. I do note one error in the first page of the report on point 9, that it said rates and collection was slightly below budget. It's actually slightly above budget at 102%. There was a last minute adjustment that we'd identified and I forgot to change the front part of the report there. Another area that we have actually included in this report is around our outstanding debt, and you will notice that in each quarter that will change quite significantly depending on whether any of our funding for our sediments and debris or other funding from government departments has been received at the end of that month. So this time we've had what appears to be a large decrease in debtors, but that's because we received some of the funding that had been outstanding last time. Yeah. And then I'd pretty much open up for questions.
Thank you, Chris. Questions for staff? Councillors? Councillor Sears.
Thank you, Chair. Financing costs, I know really caught us with interest rates. Can you just explain, Susie, please, where we borrow from and how we set our interest rates over the 3-year long-term plan, but also then how we look at that over the 3 years?
So predominantly we borrow from the LGFA, which is slightly better rates than you would at a financial services institution. And our cost of borrowing is generally pretty low as a result of that. We are looking in due course for a credit rating. So that will again help us in due course with slightly better rates than LGFA, even at where we can. Across the long-term plan, dependent on what capital items and where capital spend is required, we will look to borrow that across the long-term plan. I can't remember your exact question, Sophie, sorry.
Looking at what interest rates have done over the last 3 years and seeing how far they've jumped, or tripled probably fast. How are you budgeting, looking at, 0.8 finance costs are higher than planned?
Yeah.
How do we plan to avoid this sort of, to this year?
Yeah, so the last long-term plan interest rates were sitting at around about 1% at that time. So we do apply an average forecast rate for interest rate costs. I think it's around 4.5, slightly less than, it might be slightly less overarching that. So short-term financing costs for us, though, are slightly higher. If you recall, for working capital purposes, we borrowed short-term to cover all of our cyclone costs. That was contingent on our insurance and NEMA claims being receipted. Because that process is taking longer for us to process those claims, we've actually had to roll some of those 3-month short-term lending over until we can offset that. So that's why that's slightly higher year to date, yeah.
Thank you, Susie, which raises a question I was going to have, just around the latest situation with those insurance claims, because it seems to be bigger and hairier than we even imagined it would be.
So we have, so the insurance claims are, let's talk about that. There's the emergency claims through NEWA and insurance claims. So we've finished all of our welfare claims through NEMA. That was done just pre-Christmas, finalised that.
There is just a couple of invoices outstanding to other organisations for generators that were provided to them, and we're just in the final negotiations with them. But all the NEMA stuff for the emergency response is done and paid for.
Yeah. And I'll hand over to Jess, who is managing our insurance claims and NEMA, just for an overarching view.
Yeah, so the insurance claims are taking a bit longer than we had hoped. We've had some issues with, obviously we've undertaken a lot of this work under urgency, so getting all of the information in the correct spaces has been a bit tricky to reconcile. So we are trying to get all of that information together with the operational data around what was the damage, the scope of the works undertaken, what's left to go, so we can submit the rest of our insurance claims and NEMA infrastructure claims as well.
Yeah, predominantly, we might have fixed part of a stock bank, but we've also done the drain on the same work order. So for insurance and NEMA purposes, you have got to separate them out, and every claim that you make has to match the asset and the policy. So it's taking a bit of administration to line that all up for our external claims.
Thank you. Further questions for the team? There are none. Would someone like to move the motion? Councillor Sears moves that we're noting the finance report. I'm happy to second that, actually. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Sears? Seconding that, I'd just like to thank the staff for the progress on financial reporting and the alignment with our LTP reporting. It's the benefits of that and the work that's gone into it are not lost on me, and I'm sure we're all enjoying that greater consistency. So look, just thank you very much. We're still on that journey, but it's great progress. Thank you.
Thank you.
So put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Right, so what we'll do now is we've got the representatives from HBRIC here. We'll skip right through if Mr. Druzianic and Mr. Skirman are ready for us. We'll go straight to them. If not, you can relax, but they're up, so we're going.
Thank you, Mr Chair. We're pleased to present the quarterly performance report for HBRIC to the 30th of December 2023. We're just here to answer accounting questions. And the report is summarised, but if I could sort of give you an overview, it's been quite a solid 6 months for the managed funds. They're up by 3.29% from end of June, which is $1.5 million. The port shares were up by 1 cent, I think it was, but between June and December, so they're in these accounts at $3.51. Today's price is $2.43. Last time I looked.
$2.51.
Today?
No, they're in the account.
Yeah, $2.51. Yeah.
Three.
Oh, did I? Sorry. That'd be nice. Yeah, $2.51. So the port is travelling along quite well. The bulk cargo's been solid. Lots of logs. Cruise ships are coming in, as you have seen, having a big season with all the fine weather. The container volumes are what's holding things back, and that's mainly a result of the cyclone and the speed of some major customers getting back into full 100% reinstatement, namely Pan Pac's the big one. So that was going to take the rest of this year, calendar year, to fully recover. But there's been solid. There's costs. We're watching costs at the port, and so it's signs are looking good, but it's been a challenging period. We've got Food East, so we've got a report coming back from that board on Monday at our board meeting. They're nearing the completion of their physical facility out in Elwood Road, which is coming in on budget, and it's an impressive facility. So they're now in the phase. They've selected some real estate agents through an RFP to start chasing down some tenants, and so we're looking forward to that opening this year in the next few months. So that's steady as she goes as well. What else have we got? The investment strategy, which you've all talked about today, there's been a lot of work going on around that. We had a big workshop pre-Christmas, and we've got another one on Monday. The managed funds have been put out for RFP, and we've had very solid response to that RFP, and we're going to be analysing those in the next week or two. I think that we believe that with the revised SIPO that's been agreed with council, that we'll be able to improve the returns in the future on those funds. Anything else, Tom? No, that's good. Any questions from do you want to talk to the accounts, Jess?
I think it's they're very basic. Not much has changed.
Yeah.
Open to question.
I'd say there's been a little bit of commentary about returns in the last few years within HBRIC and the council's managed funds, which are managed under the same SIPO. I just want to make the point that these it hasn't been in my view, it hasn't been a disaster at all. There's more money in the managed funds than there was when the money came out of the port. At an absolute basis, it's progressed. Things have been gone a bit sideways in the markets with the big inflation push that came after COVID, and many conservative funds around the world, which ours was, money was all invested under a conservative SIPO, did get a bit punished because they had a lot of money in bonds, low percentage bonds. So you know, I think from an inflation adjusted, in our existing SIPO, we have a 2% expected, you know, increment inflation factor. I think we're 2 million behind on the HBRIC side, which is not a big issue in the long term, we don't think. So so that's my message: is don't panic. Let's keep the ship you know, pointed into the wind and carry on.
Thank you, Dan. Look, I'll just note for councillors that the detailed quarterly financials are now available on Stella. They weren't mentioned in this report, which was, you know, which stood alone very nicely, but the detail is available now. So I'll just open the floor to comments. Questions first.
Questions, yes, thank you. Thank you, Dan. Would it be fair to say, talking about the conservative nature of the funds, that post the IPO of the port, it was important to kind of ring-fence those funds in a conservative way to make sure that those gains weren't lost, and they certainly haven't been, as you say, the increase has been there. But that with this revised investment strategy, we're looking towards now a future where we need it to do more for the community. You know, I don't see that conservative nature as being a negative, but something's changed in the way we're needing to go forward.
I think so. I think when my observation was when the big cheque came from the port IPO, there was a you know, solid decisions made about protecting that capital, making sure it didn't get invested in the wrong, in a sort of a risky, you know, it didn't go to the organisation's head and they rushed off and spent it on something. It's sat there on conservative settings, but I think that after 2 or 3 years in COVID and cyclones, it's time to, you know, adjust that risk setting. The feedback we're getting back from the managed funds advisors, our existing advisors, if you want a different result, you have to change your, you know, you have to move your setting up from conservative to less conservative to balance. If you want to get an extra few percent, you've got to change your settings, which is what we're in the process of doing.
Councillor McIntosh.
Very brief second question.
Oh, Councillor McIntosh next. We'll come back this time.
Nevertheless, Dan, I think, you know, if you invest conservatively in a long-term fund, which is this is long-term, you're actually guaranteeing yourself the lowest possible return. Yep. And so I realise that's not the intent in future. But just a couple of questions in respect to that. So there's a relook at investment fund management that's occurring at the moment. We're seeking proposals on that. I guess at some point before too long, are you coming back to us and well, you will be coming back and saying this is how we expect to do this in future. But I'm interested in other stuff too, other things that HBRIC is going to be investing in and its strategy and all that sort of thing. Do we get, or when could we expect a perspective on that, which is to say, okay, this is what we're doing with our investment funds and this is what we're doing with the rest of our investment strategy?
Good question.
Yeah, so at the next HBRIC workshop on Monday, prior to the meeting, we're having a workshop on the investment strategy, and I think you've got it from an HBRIC perspective. You know, we've received the new mandate from council via the statement of expectations. So now we're and the sort of project team in the background is having a look at, well, what are the assets that are currently sitting under HBRC management, and how might we advise you around some of those assets and things like that, because they're ultimately still held by you. And I think with the benefit of the new independent directors and the experience that we've got around the table, that's absolutely something that will be formulated and shared with council in terms of how do you take this portfolio forward to deliver on the results that you've set out in that statement of expectations.
So yeah, we're working on this year is the answer to the question, and I think we're looking at a general manager or CEO position for HBRIC at some stage, so we've got to weigh up what skills we need in that person to execute on the strategy that you're asking us about. So we're still working that out, but we're doing it now. So there are questions, bigger questions like should HBRIC hold managed funds, or should all the managed funds be sitting on the council side, and should we be investing in other more active investments? So we're working all that out. But overall, our shareholder, its long-term plan and its needs for cash and reserve building are going to dictate, the boundaries for us a little bit. So.
Thank you. I think time for one more question. Councillor Foley.
Did you have one more? You just mentioned there at the end, Dan, about 2% inflation. I just missed a little bit what you're referring to exactly, whether it was target to beat or capital preservation. But regardless, in the environment we are now, inflation's much higher than that. So if we're getting sort of 3%, but inflation's 5% or whatever, then when do we have to reset that target? Because if we keep achieving under that, then that's not going to be good either, is it?
No, it's a moving target, as you know, and the Reserve Bank is still trying to get inflation down between 2 and 3. I understand. So if we have an inflation, internal inflation KPI in our managed funds, there won't be much cash coming out to the council to subsidise its operations. So,
You've delivered 3 quite clear priorities in terms of what you want from HBRIC. I mean, you want cash first, you want inflation proofing second, and then you want building resilience. In terms of retaining future profits beyond that. So. I think that's to Dan's point. That's the approach. We first focus on the cash. I think the inflation proofing may be a 5-year rolling average or something like that. So it gives us some. So we're not chasing our tails too much on that. Otherwise, you're just not going to get the certainty out of HBRIC that you're looking for shield.
But as we know, with the way these funds work, is you can sort of have quite sort of modest returns for 2 or 3 years. If you've got the right settings and the market jumps, you can end up with a pretty big jump. So it's an average, long-term average.
So I think there's a couple of councillors who've still got burning questions, so we'll just carry on for a couple of minutes. Councillor Williams and then Councillor Sears. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is an opportunity too good to miss. In the context of the conversation we've just had, I just wanted to make sure I don't cross any lines here, but you know what the SIPO is and the letter of expectations you've got now about building the asset base and returns and things over time, that longer term picture. What advice have you got to give us as, including in that independent director capacity, when we're considering options that our communities might put to us about selling assets to pay for meeting current costs, in terms of whether that makes your job any more difficult or less easy going forward? I mean, how does that sit with the expectations we've clearly got of HBRIC for us to, say, sell an asset of $5 million? What does that do to you?
Well, I think it depends on the scale of, would depend on the scale of the divestment, I guess. So, if council's got managed funds, we've got managed funds, the port is protected, but I guess it depends if we're talking about 10 million or...
Well, let's take that as a hypothetical, yeah.
Yeah, well, 10, we could, I don't think it would be it wouldn't materially change our world. What I would say, but I better defer to Jess.
Can I just make a comment? My question, I would follow with a question saying, what does that mean for your statement or letter of expectation around the income that council still requires from HBRIC? Because then they've got less of an asset base to create income from.
Councillor Sears.
Very brief question, just on Food East, which seems to have gone on for a long time. Is there actually any secured tenants at this point?
Not as I understand it. I've had some hot leads over the last few months, but They haven't locked anything in it as far as I'm aware. So, you know, it's an exciting, great facility. The Crown have put a lot of money into it. So, you know, what I'd appeal to the food community here to get in behind it with the councils and the shareholders and make it work.
Thank you, team. So can I have a mover for the motion that we receive and note the finance report?
Happy to move.
Okay, so Will, I picked up Will, and I think Neil was there. There was somebody over there with a hand. So all those in favour? Aye. Aye. Those against? Carried.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, team. Thank you. Right, so home stretch.
Just a reminder, Chair, I've got about 10 minutes.
Yep. Sorry for the overrun. Organisational performance report.
Through you, Chair, as Sarah and Chris join you at the table. This is the standard performance report for the quarter October to December last year, and still reflects an organisation heavily invested in recovery, and so consequent flows on to what it does in terms of BAU. Sarah, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of highlights?
Just points of note about the report. The levels of service measures have been reintroduced just on an exceptions base only, so if they're marked off track, we've got them in there with commentary. You remember last year they were all 58 were in there because we had a new council just to get them familiar with the levels of service measures, but we hope you're all up to speed now, so it just makes the report a little bit shorter. And just taking on board the comments from the last report, I've been working with the finance team to realign the financial component of the activity reporting on a group of activities basis rather than activities basis as well. So we'll be really interested to get your feedback on that if that works for you. But yes, I've been working with Chris's team on that as well. And just on points of note, yeah, Lagoima requests still remain really high. This is our second highest quarter of requests. It's only second only to the quarter immediately following the cyclone. So that's a lot of work for staff at the moment as well. And you'll note the employee count has climbed to 282. That's not unusual for quarter two as we take on summer students, but obviously we're beginning to recruit for the asset management project management office as well, so that number is growing there. But on a positive note, our annual staff turnover is trended downwards for the sixth quarter in a row, which is a really pleasing, I think, for the people and capability team. And I have just got to make one correction on point 13. I say about financial reporting, we didn't include corporate overheads being off track. I should have taken that out. They were incorporated into the group of activity financial. So apologies for that. Anything else, Chris, to add? No. Okay.
Thank you, Sarah. Questions for staff? Everybody happy?
I've got a quick one there. That comms and engagement, we never saw a jump at the end of the year, which would indicate the kind of revenue and financing, if there was any engagement, didn't really kick in until the obviously start of the next quarter.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think we had most of the media articles appeared in January. Yeah, so you're right. I think we'll see a spike there.
Quite a few years ago, I worked for a bank, and one of the things we used to do was customer satisfaction surveys. So bank something out to them every 6 months, and we get into bits of this with our reporting. But do we do any overarching thing which helps us a bit in terms of it says things like, do you know anything about the regional council? What does it do, and so on? So we get to understand how much they understand us. But it also says, you know, broadly speaking, what do you think of us? And that's quite helpful if you're in our seats, I think, or as for the business generally, but also we only get people telling us about complaints, it would be interesting to have an understanding of the overall view of people's perspective of the council.
Well, I
I think
think
we're, just through the chair, I think we're in the process of relaunching that later this year. We ran out of capacity, I think, during the cyclone, and we're a little bit concerned about bothering people too much, but I think later this year, that process gets back underway, Mike.
Indeed. So what we're looking at in the past, the council has done a once-a-year ratepayer sentiment survey. We decided to pass on that last year, considering that people who did have the time to respond would be limited, and that their responses would probably be fairly predictable. This year, we're looking at going to a twice-a-year cycle, so that in a couple of times a year, we go out to people, do a shorter sentiment survey, and try and survey basically the same number of people year over year, so we can see trends. We used to move the survey around every year, so we had no long-term trends. We're looking tentatively at this stage to doing a survey in August. It'll be the start of a 6 month cycle. Good stuff.
Thank you. Further questions? I've got a quick one, and it's just around project management office and the effect that that has on staffing levels and in fact the business of this organisation. I just wanted to ask that some thought be given to how that activity maybe, or parts of it may be able to be separately reflected, because it's not, I don't know how it fits into levels of service, and it is going to feature largely in our recruitment, so it might be useful to break that out.
Agreed, and I think Chris and the team are having to think about how we report the project management office goals objectives as we head along. But agreed, it's going to kind of artificially inflate our recruitment numbers for a period of time. So whilst on the other one hand, we'll be holding the organisation static and in fact not recruiting for vacancies, on the other hand, we'll be seeing some increase there. So we'll give some thought to how we reflect that.
Thank you.
Right, to move.
Yep, thank you. Mover. Will, we'd have a seconder. Receive the paper. Thank you, Councillor McIntosh. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So that is us. Councillor Williams, can I call upon you to close? Karaki. Your choice.
Finish where we started. I think you know kia tau, so we'll start with inua tātou. Kia tau, te ātawhai o tō tātou arihi, nā ikurati. Me te araha o te atua, me te whiwhina tahitanga ki te wārua tātou. Ake. Amen.